of the differences between the sales game and other sales philosophies you might have heard about is how we address closing. Now, in the terms of the sales game, closing is simply this. It's a next step that advances the cause ideally. And so we have a couple of types of closes that I want you to be familiar with, and then I want you to be familiar with kind of a best practice. So when it comes to closing, again, closing, simply a next step. In stage 2, that could be another meeting. That could be finding out more. That could be going deeper. Now in stages 4 and 5, that might be actually getting paperwork signed, moving the process forward and starting the work. It can mean very different things at different stages. But let's go back up in the process. A lot of times what we're thinking about closing is trying to define a next step really in our discussion and our questioning with the client or prospect. Ideally, it's a next step that advances our cause. Things that advance the cause could be perhaps maybe getting a meeting with a decision maker if the person you're working with isn't the decision maker. It could be things like demonstrating a feature or benefit of the capabilities of your organization that you talked about in the process, but this gives you the opportunity to make them real, to really show the prospect or client how you can deliver. And so when we think about that, those are called advancing type closes. The other type of close is positioning. Sometimes in the course of the strategic selling, you don't always get the close that you wanted. So we then would fall back for a positioning close. An example might be if you're talking to the prospect, you say, hey, the next step in my mind, what could it be? Maybe we want to meet with a decision maker, and they say, we're not really ready for that. Or they say, I'll call you in a month, right? We would step back for a positioning close just to keep the future discussion going, to keep the process at least alive. And we might ask them for something like, hey, would it be okay if I call you in a couple weeks? Or get them to commit to something along those lines. It really is at least keeping the process alive. And so if we can't advance, we're going to do a positioning close. A best practice, 2 really. 1, we always like to prepare in advance in our planning 2 potential advanced closes. You just never know what's going to come up in the discussion. Sometimes the client will suggest an even better close than you came up with, and that's fine. That's actually a great thing. If not, be prepared with 2 examples. They're hard to think of on the fly. The second is, ideally, this next step is as much as possible within your control. We see professionals struggle so much with trying to set next meetings or keep the process alive when they were with a prospect, they committed to getting back together, but they didn't finalize the details. How do you, if possible, keep that next step within your control? So instead of let's get back together, it could be let's get back together on Tuesday at this time. And that is really taking it back into being a little bit more within your control.